This is Champagne Problems, where we come together to explore the gray areas of drinking. This is a judgment-free zone where we can all take a look at how we make decisions about our relationship with alcohol. Mark Manson, welcome to Champagne Problems.
It's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
We are very happy that you agreed to participate. We really appreciate it. We're all big fans, and we're excited for this conversation. So let's start by giving our listeners just a little background. I think that's always the easiest thing to start with, you know, kind of where you're from, college,
Sure.
a little bit out of college, that kind of thing.
Okay. So I was born in Austin, Texas. So I lived in Austin before it was cool. And
nice. You made it cool.
Yeah, right. Went to school up in Boston. Graduated, started a small web business, lived abroad for a number of years, kind of did a nomad thing, moved from country to country, working off my laptop. Eventually the web business kind of spun into a blog. The blog blew up, became very popular around 2012, 2013. By 2015, I got a book deal. That book became The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, became a huge bestseller. And since then, I've gone on and written a few other books, and still have a blog in the online business and online courses and everything. So I've been in the personal development space for about 15 years now. I've also lived all over the world. Yeah,
Nice.
I'm excited. I'm excited to be here because, to give listeners a background, I'm not doing many interviews right now. But
we're honored. We are honored.
I have had kind of a reckoning with alcohol in my own life this year, and so when you guys reached out, I was like, all right, I think I got to take this one because this is very like salient for me right now. Right. For sure.
Very cool, man. Very cool. Well, I'm glad we caught you on this side of it and not the front side of it.
Yeah, right.
That might have been a big fuck off to us. All right, so well, that's cool, man. Thanks for sharing all that, and we will absolutely dig into some of that as we go along. But I'm interested. You started an online business, so tell me a little bit about that. Like, because I'm certainly interested in how you got going writing and like you said, in the kind of, life and how to live it kind of space. How did that all start, and what was the online business?
So it initially started, it was completely on accident. I graduated school in the summer of 2007. So I graduated into the Great Recession, worst job market in 85 years. And so it was, I was broke. All my friends were broke. Like nobody could get a job. And so I'd been kind of messing around online, and I'd done a little bit of web development for fun in college. And I started finding all these kind of like online seminars about how to build an online business, how to make money in your underwear, whatever. And I had nothing to do. So I started diving down that rabbit hole. And so initially I started a couple like really simple kind of affiliate marketing, e-commerce businesses. And I was literally just throwing anything at a wall and seeing what would stick. And I was trying to like create websites and blogs in the stuff that I was interested in. So I tried to create a website for video games. I created a website around politics. I created websites around like parties and clubs. And of course, being a 20-something single guy, I created a website around dating advice and relationship advice. And that was the one that kind of stuck and started, at least got a little bit of traction.
All your wisdom.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Your honesty.
All the things what not to do, pretty much. So that one I started writing a lot for that website, and it developed a little bit of an audience. I mostly just wrote about my experiences and the dumb stuff I was doing, and developed a little bit of an audience, and I started getting questions, and I'm like, well, shit, now these people are asking me questions. I should probably figure out what the hell I'm talking about. Yeah, right. So go to the bookstores, buy a bunch of books, start doing some research, and it kind of just created this cycle of you know, it initially was kind of dating advice for like 20 something year old guys, and then it kind of became dating advice for everybody, and then it kind of became life advice for everybody, and you know, it just evolved over many years.
That's so awesome. Well, I mean, so Models, your first book was really about teaching men, I mean, to not pull the girl's hair on the playground, but to actually be vulnerable and honest, and like, you know, you don't have to come in on the white horse and save her. You can win her by just showing that you're a vulnerable, kind person, which
you could just treat her like a human.
Like
oh my gosh,
right.
shocking.
So, what are you, an alien?
I know, right?
Unbelievable. Yeah.
Don't tell anyone that secret. But I love that too. The cool thing about your book was like people would actually share it versus like, oh, you know, don't tell the women about this secret thing, you know?
Well, you know, it's funny because so the men's dating advice market back then was dominated. There was a thing back then called like pickup artist stuff, and it was dominated by that, and it was just really gross advice. It was like, you know, make up a story about your friend's Ferrari to impress her, like that. Like this was literally the stuff being sold to guys, and so I felt pretty strongly, you know, I after a couple of years in that market, I kind of found myself on a mission of like to clean up the space a little bit, you know, because it's obviously you do want to give guys advice that works and help them, but you know, and help them like stop being whiny little bitches. But like at the same time, you don't want to turn them into monsters, right? So so that book was kind of like I always saw it as like a guide to emotional maturity for men in disguise as like a dating book. And one of the things I believed really strongly when I wrote it, because like you said, like all the stuff in the market at the time, it was like guys were like hiding it from their girlfriends and embarrassed to show it. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm like, you know, if somebody writes a men's dating book that is actually good, women are actually going to be the ones buying it for their brothers and their sons and their, you know, their nephews or whatever. And so one of the proudest things of my career is that is what's happened with that book, is that I get a lot of emails from women saying, I bought this for my son, or I bought it for my brother, which is just fantastic.
Or maybe they read it too and are now not turned on by Ferrari stories.
Right.
There's got to be a piece to that tells a guy that if a girl is turned on by your friend having a Ferrari, then maybe that's not who you should date.
Yeah, it's, you know, it's one of those things. It's a both sides thing. You know, it's like maybe the women should stop being turned on by Ferrari stories.
Exactly.
But I think that book came out the same time as the book for women that was like Men Love Bitches and all that stuff, you know? And you're like, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's not me at all, but
I can be a bitch.
That, try.
I'm so glad I left that market. Like it's so much of it is just taking like frustrated, angry people, most of whom were just dumped by somebody, and validating their desire to be an asshole.
Right. But you come along and you're different, and that's kind of what you did with The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, because everybody was like the power of positive thinking and like The Secret, and then your book was so different from that, you know?
Yeah.
It's just really cool. So
yeah, I had a similar mission of like, you know, kind of puncturing the balloon of delusional positivity.
Yeah.
I like it. Yeah.
Irrational expectations, manifesting your future.
Yeah. I feel like it's the self-help genre has gotten a lot better over the last five or 6 years, but I remember when I started writing, kind of, because like kind of, so the way the transition happened is, you know, once I started doing well in the dating advice space, I started to realize that like most people's dating problems are not actually dating problems. Like they're personal problems. It's like They have emotional dysfunctions or major
Yeah.
lifestyle issues that are going unresolved, and they're just showing up in their dating or romantic life. And so that was kind of how the pivot into just personal development in general happened. Because it's like, how many times can you write an article about like 3 best first date spots? You know,
Yeah.
like it just gets
Right.
really superficial and tedious after a while. Um, so I started writing a lot more about things like self-esteem and emotional intelligence and maturity and all that stuff. And that's kind of how I pivoted into personal development. And with that pivot, I was kind of, the way I was appalled at the men's dating advice space about how just manipulative it was, you know, in the personal development space, I was kind of appalled at how like just fuzzy feel goody it was, you know, because it's like real change is not always pleasant. In fact, it's usually
It's
unpleasant.
rarely.
Oh
Right.
my gosh.
It's
Yes.
yeah.
Growth
Yeah,
doesn't come
it's-
from pleasantries.
Yeah, exactly. It's fucking grueling.
And there's pain, and you talk about that. You're like, it's painful. Like growth is painful.
Yes.
And I love how you also talk about like action first. Instead of like
Yeah.
manifesting the Ferrari on, you know, by putting a picture on your wall, actually do something that might get
Might
you
make
to
you a
that
little
make
money,
you
right.
money to buy the Ferrari. Like that was just such a
Yeah.
cool concept. Like when I read your book, those were so many like of the key concepts that I took away, you know.
Yeah.
Well, the big thing that stands out with me is honesty. You
Mm-hmm.
know, I feel like, and there's obviously multiple facets of honesty, and there's kind of external and being able to perceive the realities of around us. And I think that's a big thing that you know, when you say puncturing, it's really like, you know, the world sucks, man. Life sucks. It's going to be very fucking
Yeah.
hard. And as soon as you realize that, the sooner you can actually get through it. And that
Yep.
is a form of honesty, but it also starts kind of internally and personally. And if we're not honest with ourselves and who we are, and or at least that we don't even know who we are, you know, that kind of internal honesty is where it starts. And I hear so much of that in your messaging.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's, you can't, until you're honest with yourself about what you're dealing with, you can't solve it.
Right.
Yeah.
So as long as you're deluding yourself or distracting yourself from whatever is going on, you can't actually tackle anything.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's going to be problems. Like I loved your book because I first picked it up because I was having a lot of anxiety and I was worried about like what other people thought. And it was a lot of like anxiety and just fears. And my hairdresser actually recommended your book in like 2017 and I downloaded it and I started reading it immediately and it just blew my mind because it was like, think about the 5 people that really matter. Those are the 5 people whose opinion of you matters. Everyone else can go fuck themselves. And your book is not fuck it. Like, this whole art of not giving a fuck. Like, it's not don't give a fuck. It's like, give a fuck about what matters. You know?
Yeah.
And that just blew my mind. And it really saved me. And that's why
Yeah.
I just loved it. And like, so many people are like, you know, your life shouldn't have problems. And your book was saying, no, you're gonna have problems, but it's how you deal with them and it's facing them and like accepting that they're your problems.
And it's also finding the problems that you're happy to have.
Right. Right.
You know, because
right.
there is a category of problem that like you're glad that that's in your life, and so
Right.
it's just it's about upgrading problems from undesirable to desirable problems.
Yeah.
The problems never go away.
Yeah, you gave that example because I run marathons, and it like blew my mind because you say in the
Oh
book,
yeah,
if you tell me to go run a marathon, I'm jacked. Tell Robbie to go run a
Yeah.
marathon tomorrow, he might start to cry. You know?
yeah.
Like, so it's like your problem that you have could to someone else be a gift, and it's just how you view it. So
For sure.
I loved it.
Because I love the idea of almost intentional suffering, you know, putting yourself through, I mean, call it challenges, call it whatever, but do you follow David Goggins?
Oh, I love David Goggins.
I thought you
I
might.
love
So
him.
intense.
I thought you might. I'm so glad
Yeah,
you do because
yeah,
there's 2 people in this world: people who hate him and people who love him.
Yeah.
I mean, I love his intentional suffering.
Stay
stuff.
hard.
Yes.
he's
Yes.
such a
Okay.
he's such a beast. He's so good.
Yes, but he's
Yeah,
all about
yeah.
pain and suffering. And yeah, I mean, when you try to change, there's going to be pain, and you just have to accept that.
Yeah.
He's like a master at is training himself to like almost deluding himself into enjoying the pain.
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah.
I remember
Mhm.
reading his book or listening to an interview of him, and he was saying that like he like does these like 4-hour workouts, and he was saying like, yeah, I don't listen to music. And
No, I
to
know.
me, that sounds
So
insane.
early.
He's like, yeah, the music distracts you from the pain.
From the pain. I don't
was
suffer
like,
as much
dude,
with music.
Yeah.
yeah, man. I was like, dude, that's hardcore. That's like next level.
Yeah.
That's nuts. So I remembered what I was
Yeah.
going to say,
Yeah.
and it was you saying that we learn to look at things in our lives that are painful, problematic, whatever, and kind of shift the way we see it and our perception of it. And I do that in my recovery space about being an alcoholic. I mean, I've very much suffered from the addiction to alcohol. It took me to very, very low places, and so now I'm on the other side of it, and there's all these rewards, and as a result of that, I'm this totally different person. Like, I would never do the work I'm doing now if I weren't an alcoholic.
Right.
And so it's this like, I appreciate the fact that I have that or had that or went through it, because look at me now, kind of thing.
Yep.
Well, and this is the funny thing that's kind of paradoxical, and I think I mentioned this in Subtle Art, but I think it it doesn't. It's one of those things that I think everybody experiences, but nobody talks about, which is like, if you name the three most influential experiences of your life, chances are they map pretty well to the three most painful experiences of your life. Like, it's generally like when there's a tragedy, when there's a death, when there's an illness, when there's an addiction and a recovery process, like it's something like that that wakes people up or sets them on a completely different trajectory. I remember, when I was pitching Subtle Art to publishers, my agent and I were in New York, and we were going to a bunch of different meetings and meeting with different editors. And, some of the editors, I felt like, kind of got it and, understood it a little bit. And then some editors, it was really clear that they didn't get it at all and didn't understand what I was going for. And I remember I walked into, so the guy I ended up working with was a guy named Luke Dempsey. And I remember I walked into his office to take the meeting, and he came in, put the book proposal down on the desk, and he said, "I'm a cancer survivor. It's the best thing that ever happened to me, and I'm going to publish your book. I don't care what it takes."
Oh my God.
And I was like, okay, that's it. Like, day's done, meeting's over. He gets it. He gets it.
Jeez, man.
And so it's, I think we all have those stories, but they're not like, they don't sell well.
Right. Yeah. We don't just offer them up.
Yeah. It's nobody like wants to hear like, I got cancer and that's how I turned my life around. Like, they want to hear what book you read, what seminar you went to, what podcast you listened to.
Man,
that sort of thing.
Wow, spot on, man. That's very much around our mission of this podcast. It's just the normalization of this conversation. And we obviously had to kind of figure out how to do that and not turn people away. But,
Right.
That certainly is the mission, to bring things to the forefront that we don't feel comfortable talking about.
Right.
For sure.
I loved it. I mean, I just thought one more thing I want to say about Subtle Art. I could talk about it all day because I loved it so much. But it was funny because I read it for the anxiety perspective, and then I read it again when I started getting sober curious. And it's even more insightful this time around because you see, like, trying not to drink is painful. Like, sometimes it really, like, it's hard. It's really hard. And so, but looking at your book and be like, look, it's going to be painful. It's going to be hard. But the action is just not drinking or trying not to drink. And then, you get to that other side. So and I also loved in your book how you talk about, I think there was a whole chapter on like, you're going to die. Like you're gonna like. I mean, it's not.
You're insignificant.
You're insignificant. I love that too. You're not special. Wait, what?
Yeah.
Like, but like every day doesn't have to be incredible. Like, you're gonna be discovered, and it's gonna just be magical. It could just be you sitting around reading a book. And what if that's your metric for a happy day? Because then you're happy.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I loved your example in the book too. It's funny. I have a friend who never responds to my text messages,
Oh.
and it makes me so mad.
Shithead.
And I call my mom and I'm like, she doesn't like me. And then I read your book again and it was like, oh my gosh, what if the metric is every time we're together, she and I have a great time? And we do. Every time we're together, we laugh and have fun. And it just totally changed my perspective of our friendship, because it's like, you know what? She's not going to respond to text, but when we see each other, we have a great time.
Yeah.
And it just took away all of the bad energy around that relationship. So I love where you talk about
Yeah.
metrics of happiness and, you know, what you qualify them as. So.
Huh. Yeah. Metrics of happiness.
Metrics of happiness.
I like it.
Yeah.
Because we have this view of happiness, this hallmark bullshit.
Right.
You
Right.
know.
Yeah. We get to define what success is for ourselves. We get to define what
Right.
happiness is for ourselves. And I think a lot of us aren't aware that we are defining those.
Right.
Yeah.
Like we're kind of just on autopilot, defining them in ways that other people probably define them for us.
Right.
And so I think it's difficult, but it's a very important process to kind of like ask, what is happiness? Like,
Right.
what do I need to make me happy, and why do I need that? And when did I decide that I needed that?
Right.
Yeah.
You give the great example in the book of the beetle that gets rejected, but he goes on to be like
Mm-hmm.
totally happy. And then you talk about the guy that gets kicked out of Metallica, and like, like it's just how you view it.
Yeah.
It's how you view that. So,
For sure.
yeah, I thought it was a great book. I think it should be required reading for everybody. And
I agree with you.
Yeah, of course you do.
I mean, I'm a little biased, but I agree with you.
So I work in the field of recovery and work with addicts and alcoholics, and I recommend Everything Is Fucked to a lot of them. I mean, the ones that I think are candidates for that kind of thinking and it would appeal to, which are a lot. I recommend it. And they all come back, holy shit. Yeah, it's crazy. I find it kind of spiritual in nature. Where do you fall on the kind of spirituality plane?
I guess I would call myself an atheist, but I'm very
Sure.
I'm not very, it's not that big of a part of my identity.
Yeah.
So I grew up in Texas. So I grew up in the church, and I grew up in a fairly religious family. I went to a Christian school growing up. So I've gotten plenty of Jesus in my life.
Religion.
Yeah. So, and I think, it's, even though I decided that I don't see myself as Christian, growing up in those communities, I think gave me a lot of respect for religion and the power of belief in people's lives. When I was in college and in my early to mid 20s, I kind of got into Buddhism, did a lot of meditation, did some retreats. Was very fascinated with like kind of Eastern spirituality, but wouldn't really call myself a Buddhist either. So religion is something I've always been very interested in,
right.
but it hasn't been a huge part of like my identity or my life.
Yeah. I mean, I'm similar in the sense that religion is the same thing for me. I mean, I grew up in the South as well. We're in North Carolina, and grew up in the church, and I grasp the messaging, and I'm super interested in the messaging, and I follow a lot of the messaging because it is good. But as far as actually what I believe, is out there, and all that kind of stuff, that falls more into the kind of spiritual place, and how that aligns with Everything Is Fucked is really does kind of go with the whole we're insignificant, we're meaningless,
Right.
like we don't really mean a whole lot. And what that does for me is it helps me kind of release the control I try to have over everything.
Right.
Like I'm not in control, and that's a very spiritual practice.
Well, it's funny. I think I just made the connection of probably why you recommend that book to a lot of people in recovery, because the thing that book grapples with, and it's something that I was kind of grappling with when I wrote it, is kind of the surrendering to a higher power thing. Because that whole book is about just nihilism. It's about like how do you cope with nihilism? How do you where do you find, if you're not religious and you want to kind of maintain a more scientific worldview, where do you find that higher power? Like, what is that guiding principle for yourself? And that's something that I've definitely struggled with in the past. But I think that book is very much a reflection of that.
Yeah, totally. It's fantastic.
So you believe that when you die, that's it? Like you're fucked? Like you're just done? Is that, is that what you're telling me?
Worm food.
Yeah, right. I mean, I honestly, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. And it's like, I'll worry about it when it happens. So.
And you won't
No,
even
you
know
won't.
when it happens.
I won't even,
know.
You won't be able
Yeah.
to worry.
Yeah.
It's funny. I really don't think very much about what
Interesting.
happens after death. I figure
It's a little
while
daunting.
I'm alive,
It's a little daunting.
I should be more worried about what happens before my death.
Yes.
But I love that. Yeah, like live today. Like this is all you have, so don't worry so much. But I do think people can get caught up on that. Like, yeah.
For sure, and I do think it can. It's a way to. I mean, if you do adopt a lot of beliefs about afterlife and all that sort of stuff, like it can influence your behavior
Absolutely.
in the here and now, and it's not necessarily in a positive way.
Right.
So I think this is what we have, what's in front of us, So like, I try to stay focused on that.
I love that. That's great.
I actually call it the deathbed perspective, where I'm not concerned about, of course, afterwards. I'm concerned about being at that moment where I realize I am about to move on and reflecting back on everything in my life.
Right.
Yep.
And I don't want to sit there and go, shit, man, I was a real asshole right before I died.
Yep.
So I try to live
sure.
every day preparing for that moment whenever it comes to
Yeah.
be satisfied.
Yeah.
For
So
sure.
I'm dying to know, what about the drinking? When did you cut
Yeah.
back? When did you?
Let's do it.
Let's do it.
Let's do
get
it.
in
Yes.
there. Yeah. Because your book opens with Bukowski. So I mean, like.
I know. Well, it's funny too. I mean, this is exciting for me and a little bit nerve-wracking. I've never really talked about this a whole lot publicly.
You're in a safe space.
Yes.
You're in a very space.
Yes, I appreciate that.
You're in the training.
But no, I am excited to talk about it because it's been a big deal for me this year. So I have been, I guess I would say, a heavy drinker pretty much my entire adult life and part of my teenage years. I don't like, the whole alcoholism is there's a fuzzy definition around that.
Spectrum. It's a spectrum.
It's a spectrum, yeah. And so there have been times in my life where I've kind of wondered if I was a highly functional alcoholic. I have a number of highly functional alcoholics in my family.
Yep.
But it was like, I drank a lot. I fucking had a great time. And for most of my, my 20s and early 30s, I would say it wasn't drastically interfering with my life. I was still being able to work well. My relationships were fine. Stuff like, it's just waking up with hangovers and maybe getting drunk and being an asshole, probably more than I should have been. But it started where for me, it actually started with health stuff. So when my career kind of took off, maybe 2016, 2017, I started getting all these work opportunities and I started traveling a lot. And I wrote, in the span of 5 years, I wrote 3 books and made a movie.
Wow.
And so I was like, just insane work schedule. I think in 2019, I was away from home for 5 out of the 12 months on trips, like business trips and stuff. Yeah. And then on top of that, I was getting older. I was hitting my mid 30s. So the same habits that made my 20s so fun were like just wrecking me in my 30s. Yeah. And, just absolutely exhausted, gained tons of weight, struggled to get up in the morning, forgetting things. Like wheels started to get rickety on the wagon. Yeah. And I started, and I had a couple of health scares during that time. And so in fast forward to 2020, I'd actually, it was right before the pandemic, and I had hired a health coach because I was like, man, I'm getting fat as shit. I feel like shit all the time. I know I need to work less. Like that was obvious to me, but I had a lot of habits with food and alcohol that were, kind of compounding everything else.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Hey, real quick,
so
were the health scares alcohol related?
no, it
Okay.
was.
Just checking.
I mean, I'm sure the alcohol contributed,
Okay.
but it was. Yeah, it was just kind of general like chest pains.
Stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, stuff like that.
Gotcha.
I was just very unhealthy in general, physically. And so anyway, I hired a health coach. And so and then the pandemic happened. And the pandemic was actually very convenient because it forced me to stay home and it forced me to eat at home. And it like, it forced me to kind of like start dealing with a lot of these habits. And it was funny because my health coach was kind of the whole time he was like, I would get on a call with him and kind of talk to him about the last couple of weeks and what I did and whatever. And he was like, "Yeah, so how much did you drink?" And I would tell him, and he was like, "Did you need to drink that much?" He was
Just
very
being honest.
non-judgmental.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was very
Was that necessary?
non-judgmental.
Was that necessary?
He just kind of like he's like, "Huh." Right, Thursday night happy hour, and you had 5 old fashions. All right. Was that necessary?
Did you feel
Have
you
you
needed
thought
that?
of? Yeah, have you thought about the repercussions of this? And I was pretty resistant to it at first. And when things kind of opened up from the pandemic, I went back to my New York social life, which, as you know,
Mhm.
Robbie, like New York social life is all about drinking.
Right.
You're just drinking all the fucking time.
Yep.
And it was funny because kind of going back to it, I was like, wow, this is not feeling good. This is not uh it's not sitting well with me. Like I feel the repercussions the next day and the day after. And so fast forward another year and I moved out here to LA. I've lost a bunch of weight. I've gotten a lot healthier. I took time off work. Everything's kind of moved in the right direction. And I started to notice, once I've kind of fixed all these other things in my life, each time I would go and drink, I get like the effects that it had on my body physically and on my mind mentally, not just the day I drank, but like a day later, 2 days later,
Days
3 days
after.
later.
Right.
Yeah, like it blew my mind. And I'm like, I'm still feeling this, like I'm still feeling like a brain fog, like
Yep.
3 days later. And I had no idea. Like it took years of like slowing down and like getting other like everything else in my life kind of like figured out for me to even notice that. And I was like, shit, I've been living like this for like 20 years and I had no idea.
Yeah.
So I finally it was, I think, beginning of the summer. So I finally started like kind of backing down. My health coach was like, "Huh, you think you're ready to give up some drinking? Like maybe slow down a little bit, maybe do a month without a drink." And he'd finally like worn me down after 2 years.
Wow.
And there was I went to an event at the beginning of the summer, probably 4 or 5 months ago now, and I forget why. I just got hammered. I don't remember why. I was just, you're
Yeah.
hanging out with some people at the bar
It's a
after
Tuesday,
after
right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, exactly. And and I'm waking up. It's the second day of the event, and I am so hungover. I can barely get out of bed.
Mm.
And I'm like, I paid like $2,000 to be at this fucking thing.
Right.
Oh man.
And I can barely even attend. I was like, this is so fucking stupid. Like it was kind of like everything that had been building up for years and years. I was like,
Right.
this is so dumb. Like,
Yep.
what am I doing? This is so irrational. And so I remember I came, and it took me like 2 days to get over that hangover. And I remember I came home, and my next call with the health coach, I was like, all right, dude, I think I'm ready. I was like, let's do a month. And he was like, great, let's do it. And he started sending me like, because he knows I love data and studies and stuff. So he starts sending me all these like nutritional studies on alcohol and how it fucks you up and how
Yeah.
it's like messing your life up and all this stuff. And I'm reading it and I'm like, all right, this is kind of fueling me. And we get to a month and I felt great. Like
Yeah.
one of the most productive months of my life. I'm sleeping like a baby every night.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
I'm happy every day.
Little less
And
diarrhea. Yeah.
you know. And so yeah, I've just kept it going. And it's been, I don't know the exact amount of time, but it's been a few months now.
That's
And it's
awesome.
just yeah, and it's just been really profound to me. And it's um and I listened, so there's a podcast, a guy named Andrew Huberman has a
Yeah, I love the
podcast.
Huberman
Oh
Lab.
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so he did a few, like I think a month ago, he did a full podcast on alcohol,
Mhm.
and I listened to that. And so keep in mind, I'm like not drinking over the summer, and in my head, I'm like, all right, I'm just gonna, this is a temporary thing. And then I listened to that episode he did on alcohol. It's like 2 hours, and it's just nothing but science of
Yeah.
alcohol. And my two takeaways were, uh, I might have been like a mild alcoholic and not known it
Mhm.
for most of my adult life. Um, and B, I don't know if I'll ever drink again.
Wow.
Like I don't see a reason to.
Yeah.
It's
Mm-hmm.
but it also, so it was kind of, on the one hand, it was double edged, right? One, it kind of like showed me, not drinking is way more powerful than you thought. And by the way, your drinking habits were way worse than you thought.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
um,
Right. So the
so
contrast is
that,
even greater.
yeah, so that's kind of been my journey with it. And, I think we could talk about, like, it's been very eye-opening for me these last few months in a lot of ways, because so much of my social life revolved around drinking. So
Mhm.
much of my identity,
Yeah.
I was the party guy. I was the guy who, I was the last guy to leave the dance floor at 4 in the morning. Like I was
Hell
the
yeah,
guy
you
who
were.
was down to rage on a Wednesday night. Like that was me. I was that guy. And so it's brought a lot of those questions around, you know, culture and identity and social influence,
Yeah.
the friends that you keep. Um,
Mm.
I think moving to LA is actually, we talked a little bit about this before we started the episode, but I think moving to LA this year has actually made this possible because it removed me from the environment in New York, which is so alcohol centric. It removed me from my friends in New York who
Yeah.
are alcohol centric.
Mm-hmm.
And it put me in an environment that is way more health conscious.
Right.
And it's just like in LA, it's just impractical to drink a lot. Like
Oh yeah.
you have to drive so much and everything's so spread out that like it's just uh, and if you do get hungover, every day's gorgeous and you want to go
Gorgeous.
outside, so
Yes.
you feel like an idiot, you know.
Yeah.
So it's it's been interesting in that sense too. That I think if I hadn't left New York, I don't know if I would be on this path right now.
But you kind of had to
Which is
forget
really,
yourself, which is something that you say. You know, you kind of had to forget the
yeah,
story that you were telling yourself, and now you've like recreated this whole new person, and LA was
yeah,
like a rebirth of that.
yeah, yeah. It's hard. I think it's funny too because I think I went through this process. I think I had a very unhealthy relationship with food and an unhealthy relationship with alcohol. And as strange as it sounds, I think I tackled the food one first. Um, so like my health coach and I, we spent years talking about like, okay, why did you eat like an entire cake yesterday, or like why'd you eat an entire pizza? Like let's talk about this. Like this is not this is not practical. uh I had some very unhealthy eating habits that I struggled with a lot. And anytime he tried to go there with me with alcohol, it was just like kind of a no-fly zone.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I think I had to like do all that work with food
Food. Yeah.
and get healthy in that area before
Pro-
I was even willing to be like, oh shit, like
Yeah.
I think I've been doing the same thing with alcohol, you know?
yeah. And you'd already done some of the work, so it wasn't brand new.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I think it's part of it is there's a little bit of, uh, alcohol is a little bit taboo. And I
Absolutely.
think, and I think there's a little bit of denial there. Nobody wants to admit that they have a drinking problem, no matter how severe the drinking
Right.
problem.
Yeah.
And so I think I always was able to, my drinking habits were very unhealthy, but they weren't catastrophic like they are for some people. And so I was always able to kind of like say, well, my drinking is not catastrophic,
Yeah.
therefore I don't have a problem.
Yeah. I'm not that guy.
Yeah.
I'm not
Yeah.
that guy.
I'm not
Yeah,
that guy. I'm not
exactly.
that. Yes. Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And we all do that.
Everybody does,
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I
yeah.
don't know if that's like a new generational thing because the old generation was like, oh, it's the person who's drunk on the side of the road instead of the mom that drank a bottle of Chardonnay, and it's just
Yep.
kind of, and no, like you said, no one wants to be that person, and it's a very much denial thing.
Well, and
Yeah.
it's denial, but it's also we often forget the effects of alcohol.
Right.
That it's
Yeah.
different than eating a cake, right? It
For
actually
sure.
it actually gives you euphoria, and like Huberman
Dopamine.
explains, there is a lot going on inside of the head
Yep.
that is
Yeah.
very, very appealing.
Yep.
For a lot of
Yeah.
us, and then comes like the addiction to that.
Yeah.
But I do want to go back to one thing that you mentioned was the identity shift. And I think this is an
Mhm.
important topic because a lot of our listeners are grappling with this stuff. Not so much, the heavy alcoholism, but more so just making changes and
Yeah.
being open about that and going out to social events and not being the person you used to be or at all or not even going to the event. And that's tough. And it is something that everybody who drinks consistently has to go through when they make those, or when and if they make those changes, because it is a part of our identities. It's a part of the culture. It's a part of life. All of a sudden, it's not, and it's like, who the fuck am I now?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
heavy.
I think identity is tough because I think it's multifaceted. Part of it is like, who do you believe you are?
Right.
That's a piece of it. Is like, am I a person who enjoys drinking? Am I a person who doesn't want to drink? It's you have to kind of decide in your own head who you want to be first. And I think that's kind of the easiest part. Is like intellectually getting there. But as my friend Derek Sivers says,
I love
if
him.
everything was if everything was as simple as intellectual understanding, we would all be millionaires with six packs.
Yes.
Uh, so intellectually getting there, I think, is the easiest part. I think that the next part is the behavior,
Yeah.
is like
Living
getting
it.
yourself to actually take action. And I think the thing that gets people stuck is that no behavior happens in a vacuum. Everything is kind of interrelated. So as you mentioned, like if you decide not to drink, well, your three best friends, their favorite thing to do is to go to happy hour on Thursday. So like, how are you going to hang out with your best friends now? Are you going to lose those friendships? Are you going to lose those connections? Or what are you going to do with the extra free time? I mean, for me, it's like I come from a family that likes to drink a lot. It's like our Thanksgiving, Christmas, family reunions. I mean, everybody's just fucking pounding
Yeah.
the bottles. And
Same.
that's kind of just how we deal with each other. But, so for me, there's an open question of like, when I go home for the holidays this year, like, what's that going to be like?
Woo.
I haven't been sober, with my family and like for an extended period of time. Like I couldn't even tell you the last time I was
Yeah.
sober over the
Yeah.
holidays. I was probably a teenager, to be honest. So yeah, it's scary. It's really scary. And so I think it could probably be useful. I was very fortunate. Uh, I did not plan on becoming alcohol free. It just kind of happened. And I think it happened because I was very fortunate in that moving cities, it broke a lot of those connections anyway. So it's like, okay, I need to make a new group of friends anyway. Who are the friends I want to be friends with?
Right.
It's like I get to start over. I get to pick kind of
Right.
what I value or who I want to spend my time with. And so that was very fortunate for me. But I think, yeah, you have to kind of like, it can be helpful to kind of look at each of those connections and try to think, maybe kind of untie those connections first. So if like the thing you do with your best friends is always go to happy hours, like maybe try to start by finding other things to do with your friends first, and then stop drinking.
Right.
Kind of like set the stage to make the behavior change easier. There's in habit change research, like the most common finding is basically like it's willpower always fails eventually. Like maybe you can do it once, maybe you can do it 5 times, but eventually willpower is always going to fail you. So the only way you can actually make a change is to alter your environment to make the change easy and inevitable. So it's like the difference between having pizza in the fridge and like willing yourself to not eat it versus just like fucking not having pizza in the fridge in the first place. Like,
Right.
just throw it out or don't buy it in the first place. If you just don't buy it in the first place, it becomes 10 times easier to not, binge on pizza.
Yeah.
So I think you can look at the change in the same way. It's like, okay, what are factors in my social life and environment that are making alcohol feel inevitable? And how do I change those, or how do I alter those so that it doesn't?
Did you have anything that first month that really worked for you to not drink? Like, did you ever like have any like substitutions or things that you did instead of that action?
Uh, so here's the funny thing. One of my justifications for drinking was always, um, I tend to get bored very quickly, especially at like social events. And
Especially at happy hours.
yeah, yeah, right. and and so my excuse, like if I ever got stuck in a social situation where I was kind of bored, I was like, well, if I drink, it stops being boring. It makes
Absolutely.
it makes makes boring people fun, and
Yep.
Yep.
and so uh, and so that was my justification for a long time, and finally I just hit a point where I was like, maybe I just give myself permission to like leave these events, like.
Yeah, there you go.
And again, it comes back to the identity thing, because a huge part of my identity was like, I was the fun guy at the party. I
Right.
was the guy, I'm going to be the last
Yeah.
to leave.
You don't want to let all
And
these people down by leaving.
Yeah, right. My people need me.
The poor party. All right.
The dance floor needs me.
It's calling.
Yeah. So I think a lot of it was just, I needed to let that go.
Right.
So that I could give myself the freedom to be like, yeah, if you go to a party and you're there for an hour and it's kind of boring, like just go home.
Go home.
Yeah.
It's not the end of the world.
Right.
Yeah.
I've got plenty of friends. I don't need to be friends with everybody. So yeah.
Yeah, and golly, man, that's just one of many things that become a new normal for you, as we
Yeah.
change these things. And one of the things that I think about when when people make these heavy changes is grief. And we actually did a whole episode on grieving over alcohol, grieving over even making changes to your consumption or your relationship. And you go
Yeah.
through these experiences and these feelings of kind of anger and the standard kind of process. And that can apply to, possible friendships. There
Yep.
a lot of my friends who I considered to be my best friends are now not my friends anymore because I don't drink anymore. And that kind of sucked. I had to
Yeah.
kind of make that call at some point, and they also had to make that call too. Like, do I want to hang out with this guy that doesn't drink anymore? Well, and if they don't want to, that hurts, man. That hurts me. So there's
Yeah.
all that stuff too. But I do love the idea of kind of bringing this back to a lot of your messaging, which is embracing that pain.
Yeah.
And a lot of us avoid this change and avoid this. We get older in life and it does hurt worse. The hangovers are worse. Our bodies aren't processing it the same. And we kind of naturally have to make these changes, and we're fearful of it. And the pain is going to it's going to be too great, or the suffering is going to be too great. Therefore, I'm just going to keep fucking pouring it down my throat to feel better. And the fact is, we have to embrace this pain. And if there is a pain to choose, it's this one, right? Because the rewards are so great.
Yeah. And again, I think it comes back to framing it properly. It's like, don't frame it as, do I want to be drinking and miserable or sober and happy? Like it's no, you're trading one set of problems for another. Do you want the alcohol set of problems, or do you want the sober set of problems?
Yeah, the real life.
And there are problems that come with dropping alcohol and letting it go. And but it's ultimately a better set of problems, in my opinion. And you work through it. You make some new friends, you keep some old ones, you find some new hobbies. Like life goes on, it's fine, but it is a process for sure.
What would you say like are your top 3 benefits? You mentioned sleep, but of giving up drinking, have you found?
I feel like the mental clarity is astounding to me.
Mm-hmm.
So it's funny, I realized when I did the first month, I remember talking to my health coach, and he asked me, he was like, when was the last time you went a month without drinking? And I was like, I think I was like 18. And
the month before I started.
Yeah, exactly. The month, yeah. But it was, after a few weeks, because one thing that I learned on the Huberman podcast is he said it's like alcohol, especially if you drink a lot. He said it affects you mentally and physically. It affects you for weeks and months afterwards. Like if you have been a heavy drinker for a long time, like it takes multiple months for your body and your brain to kind of fully reset back to a fully healthy state. And so after about a few weeks, like just the mental clarity and the mental energy that I had blew my mind. I was like, I feel like I've gone through my entire life, with like a weight vest on.
Yeah.
70%.
Look what you could have done.
I know, right? Like I'm just like, holy shit, what have I been doing? So there's been a number of things like that have kind of reinforced, and I'm sure the sleeping better has factored into that for sure. I think it's, one thing that I've gotten older, this hasn't been a benefit, but it's something that I've become more aware of the more I go socialize sober, is I realize that like pretty much like if I was to make a list of like the 10 most embarrassing or regretful things I've ever said or done to other people, I was probably drunk on 9 of them at least. And
hungover on number 10.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's been an eye opener as well. It's just like I'm so much more, I guess I'm able to like kind of hold empathy and compassion a little bit more and situations that maybe before I would have blown up or said something rude or made an ass out of myself or whatever. So
I love that.
Those are
that's
great.
Beautiful.
Yeah, those are great.
Yeah.
Mark Manson, why do you care?
Because you have to.
Boom.
I love it.
You have no choice.
You have no choice.
You have to give a shit. You have to give a fuck.
You got to give a fuck.
It's impossible not to. It's just impossible. So if you have to give a fuck, you might as well give a fuck about good things.
Yeah.
Oh, I loved your book, Will, by the way. That was also really well done. The book you did with Will Smith is so well done. Like, it wasn't just a memoir. It was also like a very powerful, like really inspirational book. So really good.
How was that?
So,
I have to ask, how was it working with Will?
I love Will. Wonderful dude. It's unfortunate what happened at the Oscars, but I have nothing but great things to say about him.
Awesome.
Funny coincidence with him too. Went 25 years without having a drink.
Oh my gosh.
No way. Oh wow.
Wow.
Yeah. He I think once he got his break in Hollywood, he didn't drink until like maybe 5 years ago.
Wow.
Interesting.
Yeah,
That's
so
so
very
cool.
like a totally sober guy. Still, he's never had more than like one or two in his life. So that was the other thing too, is I realized that like I hadn't really been around people who didn't drink very much,
Yeah.
and being around him, you know, I spent about 2 years with him, and just seeing the level at which he operates and the level that his team operates was like very inspirational.
Yeah.
And yeah, one of the big things for him was there was absolutely no alcohol.
God,
Wow.
that's
That was
so
like,
cool to hear. Well, if you could
yeah.
just if you could get him on our podcast, that'd be great. So, well,
Well, I want to meet with you
Yeah, yeah.
and Derek Sivers. I would love to have like the two of you
Ah,
together. I bet you guys are just like mind blowing, the two of you together. I think that'd be incredible.
Derek's the man. I love
He's the
Derek.
man. I mean, he's so cool. I love his
Yeah.
like little thing. Like he's like, if you email me, I'll respond. And I tried it, and he did respond.
Hey.
Hey, so
Yeah.
tell
how
me.
about that?
Yeah, Derek is just one of the most interesting people I've ever known. He's
Yeah.
brilliant.
That's awesome.
Very
Well, I
cool.
think you're amazing. So I can't thank you enough for taking this time.
Thank you.
And I love what you're
Thank
doing
you.
on Instagram too. Like your thing about anxiety and breathing. I look at that video and I watch it. So thank you. It's really awesome. It's good content.
Cool.
It's quality content.
Yeah, Mark, thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. We appreciate you feeling safe to come on here and share your story for one of the first times, maybe the first time. We're honored to be a part of that. So thanks for doing that, and thanks for agreeing to come on.
Absolutely. Thank you guys.
The information and opinions shared on this podcast are solely those of the hosts and guests and are not a substitute for medical advice. If you feel like you may need professional help, here are some resources. For the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration hotline, call 1-800-662-4357 or visit smsa.gov. For listeners in the Charlotte, North Carolina community, visit dilworthcenter.org or call 704-372-6969 or visit theblanchardinstitute.com or call 704-288-1097.